Video, I'm going to be showing you a new feature that I built for my e-commerce website, and it's this filter component right over here in the shop. What we can do is select items that are either greater than $50 or less than $50, or we could simply reset the filter. To get a better understanding of this, let's jump into the code. And firstly, let's take a look at the filter component. This is a controlled form, so the state tracks any changes in the selections made in the form. I have a handle change function over here, and this gets called on line 26, and essentially every time a selection is made, the value gets reflected in state by firing this function. Okay, so on submitting the form, what happens is I prevent the default form behavior, which would cause a page refresh. I then invoke a function that gets passed in by the parent component. We're going to take a look at this in more detail, but essentially this is the function where you make your asynchronous call to the database to retrieve the items that have been filtered. Okay, let's jump into the parent component. If we take a look at the parent component, we can see that we are on line 26, we are rendering the filter component. We're also passing in that function that we were talking about, and this is defined over here in map dispatch to props. On line 37, we can see we're accepting an argument of the selection, and then we dispatch an action called filter items. Now let's take a look at the action filter items and what that does. If we go over here, starting on line 20, we have our filter items action. Once again, we're accepting the argument of selection, and over here what we're doing is we want to send some data to the server using a GET request, and the way to do this is by setting up search parameters. So we generate a new URL and then we add in search params, and the key is Q, and the value of it is going to be the argument of the selection that we provide. What happens here is that we perform our fetch as usual. We're going to get back a promise. We anticipate to be receiving back a JSON, but in order to access it, it happens on line 27. Once we receive back the data, we then dispatch another action to update state and update what gets rendered on the page. And in this case, we're dispatching add items. This is nothing new. This is what I've been using to render the shop items to begin with, and it's over here. Simply what that does is it just updates state, and that will trigger a re-render. Now in terms of what goes on the back end, we can take a look over here. If we go back to our item actions and we see the URL we're hitting on line 21, we are sending a GET request to localhost 3000/items. You can see over here on line 6 that get items maps to the items controller index action. Let's jump in there, and we see over here conditional statement. And what this is going to do is it's going to look at the params we receive. If we see a search parameter that corresponds to greater, we're going to go into the database using active record where and pull out the relevant data. Now the way I've structured this is using the array format, and since we're going to be using user input to access data from our database, this is a safer way because it mitigates against injection attacks. Okay, so we have three conditions over here: if it's greater or if it's less. Otherwise, for any other scenario, which is the reset or not using the filter at all, we just simply return all the items to the front end.